Hi everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Thanks so much, Rod, for the wonderful introduction, and thanks so much to APACC. I realize I haven't thanked APACC at all throughout all these 3 days, but it's been really amazing and so good to see everyone. Are my slides up? Not yet. Okay. Great. So I'll be talking a little bit more about community-based research, sharing a little bit about the frameworks that I'm familiar with, and its relevance in it says biomedical sciences, but broadly, I guess we do a lot of research in like clinical trials, in terms of hospital work, so I think how do we deepen engagement in these settings? And one thing that I reflect on, in my own personal experience, as someone living with HIV, person who uses drugs, gay men, like a multi-hyphenate, these kind of things are like, am I a community engaged researcher? Does it mean that me being a part of a research team, it means community engaged research? Initially when I started out, this is something that I thought was the case. But I think I came about two realizations. The first one is that like I don't represent everyone in those communities, right? Those are my own experiences. The second thing that I came to realize was that, my positionality as a researcher gave me a privileged position. I'm still a researcher after all, in spite of my other affiliations. So therefore, it's also so important to not just say that, I'm part of the community, I'm doing research with the team, this is community engaged research. I don't think that's the way that it works. So I think, I think really is about, how do we deepen community engagement, and not just, it's no longer a matter of like yes or no, it's more like how deep can community engagement be. So, I think for the start, I'll do a little bit of definitions for community engagement, and just talk a little bit about why community engagement is so important. So, some of you might have seen this before. This is, I think, maybe one of the more prominent kind of frameworks or continua of community engagement. So in this, is from a CTSA, a community engagement, principles of community engagement document. So it's talking about, how can we deepen community engagement? And we see it as a continuum, from outreach all the way to shared leadership. And this is characterized by increasing levels of community involvement, impact, trust, and communication flow. So when communities are involved, you can actually do a little bit of outreach, just ask for opinions, like you coexist with each other, but there's not a lot of like deep communication. But with shared leadership, as you have seen from a lot of the talks, throughout APACC, where communities get involved with the protocol development, they get involved with the healthcare, lay out the protocols. These are examples of shared leadership. We've got many good examples out there. Some of you might also have seen this Einstein's ladder of citizen participation. So this is a little bit more common in the social sciences, and we've got all the way from researcher manipulation. There's zero agency. There's no room to actually involve yourself as a member of the community or as a citizen in a research, all the way up to citizen control, where there's actually citizen power. So this is just another example that has been prominent in community engagement research. I won't belabor the point because, like throughout the whole conference, most of you would already know why community engagement and community leadership is so important. I come from a social determinants of health kind of a background. So, one thing that we also kind of promote in the social determinants of health field is that community engagement is so important, right? Because when we think about social determinants of health, we are thinking upstream. What are the things that really change structures, that change context, that lead people to more vulnerable positions? And if you involve communities, let's say someone who is sitting at the intersection of multiple minoritized identities, right? Their experiences reflect all these intersecting macro level, wickedness in the system. When you ask them about their experiences, they were able to tell you, these are my lived experiences. This is what I've experienced in my formative years. You're able to diagnose upstream. And when you involve them in the delivery of health services, you're able to get them to prescribe and implement downstream as well. So you actually get the whole continuum of from the start to end. It also increases dialogue between local stakeholders and also provides political support for work when you involve communities. And definitely there is power sharing as well as shared governance of health policies, as you have seen from like key population-led services and so on. In the global health setting, getting communities involved is also so important, because we are so used to thinking about, like funders funding low resource settings, or like universities from high income settings, collaborating with lower resource settings. And I think what getting communities involved in a local setting does is it advocates for local wisdom, local histories, local expertise, and local leadership in the face of such unidirectional transfers of knowledge. And it prevents what they call epistemicide. So epistemicide is the killing off of a knowledge system that might have seem to be inferior, but actually it might actually have possessed a lot of local strength and wisdom. So these make global health practices more fair, mutually beneficial, and it helps to counteract deficit-oriented mentalities which reinforce colonial power. I won't go through this because I'm sure this is an example of community scorecards from Vietnam. It was published in the Journal of International AIDS Society. So getting communities involved basically helps to improve services over time, and helps to improve health systems overall, which not just benefits communities but also healthcare professionals and providers too. Key population-led services, if you don't know about them by now, by this part of the conference, I think we aren't doing enough to talk about it. So, scoping review by George Ayala and colleagues in 2019 on community-led and peer-led services, found that there were a lot of advantages of peer-led services compared to traditional services, and that communities can effectively implement services, for their own communities. So it's very feasible. So I now draw on a few different case studies, to kind of go into the second half of my presentation. So these are some examples that, through my own work, through the work of my colleagues, we've tried to deepen community engagement through different methods. One of them is crowdsourcing. The second one would be co-creation or co-production. And the third one would be, maybe not so much community engagement, but, in our existing research methods, how can we make things more inclusive, more diverse, and, reflect the lived experiences of participants even better, and I believe there's a form of, not so much community engagement, but, community experience deepening. So with crowdsourcing, Professor Tucker and colleagues have identified a few different types of crowdsourcing activities. So these largely revolve about, one, open calls and challenge contests. So these are open calls where you ask communities out there, the public out there, to get involved in a particular research project, to submit their ideas for a particular intervention. And this way you can actually get people who are not within your own networks involved in the whole process of developing a research protocol, developing a consensus statement, and also even developing interventions. The second one would be hackathons or designathons. So these are often three-stage processes. The first stage being there's an open call for ideas. The second stage, it's characterized by intense collaborations. Sometimes it's like a 2-hour webinar. Sometimes it's a 72-hour, locked away kind of thing where you collaborate in groups. And, it ends off with an evaluation or some kind of implementation. The last one is digital systems. I've heard a few examples of crowdsourced digital systems as well. I was talking to Meng Li the other day from the Chimera D43 program, about the PrEP locator, in Malaysia. Yesterday I heard a presentation on crowdsourcing for, sexual health services for migrants in Japan. So these are all examples of crowdsourcing. Our team at University of Carolina Project China helped develop a WHO TDR practical guide on crowdsourcing for health and health research. So there are a few different steps that are sort of best practices that we have used. And through this process, we have also identified ideas and to actually develop interventions. Designathons were used to also further refine interventions, and what some past studies by Professor Tang and colleagues have found were that these are not only comparable to expert-driven interventions, but they were even more superior to expert-driven or expert-developed marketing material for social change and behavioral change among MSM in China. The second type of way of deepening engagement, I guess, is to also, make sure that communities have a seat at the table when you are developing your protocols and developing your research material. So getting them involved right from the start. And co-creation and co-production is one way of doing that. So co-production, if you look on the pyramid on the right of the screen, at the very top of it, it really means, having researchers and communities at the same level, creating protocols together. And I think that's what's important is that it's not getting information, getting consultation, because you end up having the decision making within the research team only. But communities have an equal decision making power, with the researchers. I think there's a lot of respect in that whole process and deliberation in that process as well. And Liask and colleagues, do characterize this whole process in the 4-stage process. Like when you're having a research project, you need to do needs assessment for what aspect of the research project needs co-creation, plan for the co-creation activities, conduct them, and then do some evaluation. So I'm going to share one example in this project that I've been working on together with the team. So this is a project by Professor Tucker and colleagues called the Pay It Forward Gonorrhea Testing Randomized Controlled Trial, or the Pioneer Study. It's an NIH R01 funded study. And Pay It Forward in short really is this social innovation to get people tested or to uptake health behaviors. First someone receives a gift, typically a health intervention such as a free gonorrhea test or chlamydia test. People feel good receiving that gift. They feel the kindness from others. They do take up the test, and then they continue to donate on to someone else. So this is the premise of Pay It Forward. And because we're trying to right now scale up Pay It Forward after a successful quasi-experimental trial and RCT, we have been working together with communities to create some of these like community engagement materials. So one of the things is that the communities aren't part of this as part of a community advisory board. They are hired as professional consultants, in co-creation groups. So they have a contract, they have terms of reference. We see them as consultants from the community, and we're working with them to generate some of these material. And I think that's a small but I think meaningful difference, right? People don't attend community advisory boards. Like they do it out of the goodness of their heart. But I feel like people still do it out of the goodness of their heart in these cases. But they have to be treated as professionals, as alongside researchers. We are all professionals. We just fill different roles based on our own training. So they've also been involved in generating protocols and workflows for our RCT as well. And this is one example, where researchers having that requisite knowledge, to bring to the table first. You would create like a skeleton, create some kind of initial framework, where we have a discussion for 1 or 2 hours about how do we get this done together. And that's something that we generate together in these co-creation group discussions. Finally, I want to talk about innovations to deepen community engagement. And I want to sort of like premise this at, this doesn't really fall under technically, community engagement, because community engagement would be, seeing how communities can get even more involved, potentially changing structures of research projects. But what if you are in a situation where, maybe you're doing some qualitative research and you want to deepen engagement in that particular project, this is also possible, and we've found several ways. So I think there's a lot of promise in asynchronous methods, methods of qualitative research that don't require everyone to be in the same room, in the same platform at the same time. There's also some hybrid and online methods as well. And what we've seen are, chat-based focus group discussions and things like citizen ethnography that have helped to, deepen engagement, both, I guess, at the project level and at the study level as well. So we've done some chat-based focus group discussions using WhatsApp, using a WeChat. These typically happen over the course of like 5 days. Like a focus group is 5-day focus group. And we have a set of questions for each day. We have a topic for each day, and we allow individuals to respond when they can across 5 days. And what this does is it's actually a lot of low costs for researchers. We found that it was a lot more accessible and person-centered. So in a study using WeChat in China, about 60% of our participants who identify as men who have sex with men, reported that they had never attended an in-person LGBTQ-related activity before. And it makes us wonder, for these individuals participating in this focus group discussion, would they have attended something in person that might have, like inadvertently exposed their sexual orientation to other people? Third, it also helped to democratize participation. So in these chat-based focus groups, it's not just directed by a facilitator, but everyone can share snippets of their own life. You can share videos, you can share pictures, you can share links, anytime you want. The dynamics are a lot flatter in that sense. Then we covered a wider breadth of topics. Although what I would say is that, we do compromise a little bit on depth, and there are some papers that talk about that, which I won't go into detail. Okay, second last slide. I think I'm going to try and make it for time. So like citizen ethnography, I just want to introduce this framework. So there is a paper out there on doing scaled public citizen-led research that I found really impactful. It teaches you how to get more people involved. In research, including lay, public, and community members who might not have had previous training in research. So do check it out. It's by Amiruddin, Harrigan, and Naqvi, whom Ichal Naqvi was my mentor back at the Singapore Management University in sociology, and that's where my love for community engagement started as well. And I also want to do a shout out, in terms of citizen ethnography. If you're doing qualitative research, you don't necessarily only need a researcher to guide qualitative research, but if you give participants a chance to do photo voice, take photos and interpret these photos by themselves, you can do it and create a lot of meaningful insight as well. And I think that's one way of deepening the kind of insight into the lived experiences of participants too. And I believe the team doing this is also here today. I see Pui Lee, I see many colleagues from Malaysia too. And of course, Valerie Anshaw is one of my idols from research. But yeah, I hope that was helpful, and thank you so much, Rod, for the opportunity.